The rain hammered down like a judgment from heaven, soaking through my cheap blazer as I stood alone in the elementary school parking lot. 20 minutes past dismissal, and still no one had come. I watched the last car pull away, its taillights disappearing into the storm, leaving me and one small figure huddled under the overhang by the main entrance. The boy couldn't have been more than 7, his oversized backpack making him look even smaller as he peered anxiously at every approaching vehicle, hope flickering and dying with each one that passed without stopping. I should have left. My meeting with the school board had ended 30 minutes ago, and I had an empire to run, enemies to outmaneuver, decisions that affected hundreds of lives waiting on my desk. But something kept my feet rooted to the wet pavement, my eyes drawn back to that small, solitary figure who refused to go back inside, who kept watching, waiting, believing someone would come. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Thunder cracked across the sky, and the boy flinched, pressing himself closer to the brick wall. That's when I made my decision. I crossed the parking lot, my Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles I would normally avoid, until I stood at the edge of the overhang, close enough that he noticed me but far enough not to frighten him. Nobody picked you up either? His voice was small but steady, those words hitting me with unexpected force. He looked up at me with eyes too old for his young face, brown and intelligent, framed by wet dark hair plastered to his forehead. His uniform was worn but clean, carefully maintained despite its obvious age, and his hands clutched the straps of his backpack with white-knuckled determination. I found myself smiling despite the weight of the question, despite the assumptions it carried. No, I replied, crouching down to his level, my expensive suit absorbing rainwater from the wet concrete. Nobody picked me up either. His eyes widened slightly as he took me in properly for the first time. I knew what he saw, a man in his early 30s, custom-tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the kind of presence that commanded attention even in an elementary school parking lot. Not the type who usually got left behind. But you're a grown-up, he said with perfect childhood logic. You can drive yourself home. That's true, I conceded. But sometimes being picked up isn't just about transportation. Sometimes it's about knowing someone's coming for you. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, of understanding too profound for someone so young. You get it, he said quietly, and those 3 words contained volumes. I studied him more carefully now, noting the details I'd missed from across the parking lot. The fading bruise on his left arm, barely visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. The way he held himself, compact and ready, as if expecting the world to take another swing at him. The careful control in his posture that spoke of practice, of learning early that showing fear or weakness invited more pain. What's your name? I asked, my voice gentler than I'd used in years, perhaps ever. Felix, he replied. Felix Morrison. I'm in 2nd grade, Mrs. Patterson's class. He recited it like a credential, like proof of his existence and worth. I'm Adrian, I offered, extending my hand. Adrian Constantine. Felix hesitated for just a moment before shaking my hand with a grip surprisingly firm for someone so small. That's a fancy name, he observed. Sounds important. Names are just labels, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. In my world, names carried weight, legacy, and often, a death sentence. It's what you do with them that matters. The rain intensified, sheets of water now visible beyond our small dry haven. Felix shivered, and I noticed his jacket was far too thin for this weather, more suitable for autumn than the early winter storm that had caught the city unprepared. How long have you been waiting? I asked. Felix glanced at his wrist, where a watch should have been but wasn't. Since 3:30. Miss Davis said my social worker was coming to pick me up, but... He trailed off, shrugging with the practiced nonchalance of someone used to broken promises. Social worker. Foster care. The pieces assembled themselves into a picture I recognized all too well, though from a very different angle. In my line of work, I encountered the aftermath of the system's failures regularly. Kids who aged out with nowhere to go, who fell into the wrong hands, who became casualties of a society that had given up on them before they'd had a chance to prove their worth. And your foster family? I asked carefully. The Hendersons don't like coming to school, Felix said, his tone neutral, carefully devoid of emotion. Mrs. Henderson says it's not her job to chauffeur me around. I usually take the bus, but it broke down today, and they said someone had to pick me up. He looked up at the darkening sky. She's probably mad. She doesn't like when things mess up her schedule. The casual acceptance in his voice, the way he spoke of neglect as if it were merely inconvenient rather than cruel, sent a cold rage through my chest. I'd built an empire on controlled violence, on calculated responses to threats and disrespect, but this casual abandonment of a child sparked something rawer, less controlled. How often does this happen? I kept my voice level, though fury simmered beneath the surface. Felix seemed to consider whether to answer truthfully. Whatever he saw in my expression must have convinced him, because he said, "This is the 4th time this semester. Usually, the school calls someone else, but..." He gestured at the empty parking lot. "I guess everyone went home because of the storm." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found what I needed. "What's your social worker's name?" "Miss Chen." "Sandra Chen." Felix watched with cautious curiosity as I composed a message. "What are you doing?" "Making sure someone knows you're here," I said. "And making sure this doesn't happen again." I sent the message not to Sandra Chen, but to my personal assistant, Marcus, with instructions that were clear and non-negotiable. Find out everything about Felix Morrison's case. I want names, addresses, case history, and I want the social worker's supervisor on the phone within the hour. And send a car to Riverside Elementary. The boy needs a ride. Felix was still watching me with those two knowing eyes. "Are you rich or something?" The question, asked with such directness, caught me off guard. "Something like that," I admitted. "Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" The follow-up question was even more disarming. I could have lied. Should have, probably. Instead, I found myself giving him the truth. "That depends on who you ask. I do things that some people think are bad for reasons I believe are good. It's complicated." Felix nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Like Robin Hood?" I couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising me. "Not exactly. Robin Hood stole from the rich to give to the poor. I manage certain businesses that exist in gray areas. But I have rules, and one of them is that children don't pay for adult mistakes." "Gray areas," Felix repeated, testing the phrase. "Like when something isn't all good or all bad?" "Exactly like that." We fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the drumming of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I found myself studying Felix more closely, recognizing in him echoes of my own childhood. Not the specifics, I'd grown up in wealth, groomed from birth to take over my father's organization, but the essence of it. That feeling of being unwanted, of being a piece moved around a board by forces beyond your control, of learning too early that the world was neither kind nor fair. "Can I ask you something?" Felix's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Of course. Why did you stay? You said you could drive yourself home. You don't know me. You didn't have to wait." It was a question I'd been asking myself, and the answer that came surprised me with its simplicity and its complexity. "Because when I was young, not much older than you, I waited for someone too. And they never came. I guess I wanted to make sure you didn't have to know how that feels." Felix's eyes glistened, though whether from rain or tears, I couldn't tell. "Who were you waiting for?" "My father," I said, the admission costing more than I'd expected. "He was supposed to pick me up from school. He never did. He sent a driver instead, and that was the day I learned that I was an obligation, not a priority." "Did it get better?" The question was asked with such fragile hope that lying felt impossible. "Eventually," I said. "But I had to make it better myself. I had to decide who I was going to be, regardless of who other people decided I should be." Felix absorbed this, his young mind processing concepts he was far too young to fully understand but old enough to feel the truth of. "I'm going to remember that," he said finally. "When I grow up, I'm going to be someone who shows up. Someone people can count on." The declaration, delivered with such fierce determination, struck something deep in my chest. Here was a child who had every reason to become bitter, angry, destructive, instead choosing to become the opposite of what the world had shown him. It was brave in a way that my entire organization, with all its power and resources, could never be. Headlights cut through the rain, and a black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, Marcus at the wheel. He parked near the entrance and emerged with an umbrella, approaching with his usual efficiency. "Mr. Constantine," he greeted me before turning to Felix with a kind smile. "And you must be Felix." "I'm Marcus. I've been asked to give you a ride home." Felix looked from Marcus to me, uncertainty crossing his young features. "Is it okay?" he asked me, and I realized with a start that he was asking for permission, for guidance, treating me as a source of safety in a world that had taught him to trust no one. "Marcus works for me," I explained. "He's someone you can trust. He'll make sure you get home safely." "Will I see you again?" Felix asked, and the question carried a weight that suggested it meant more than casual curiosity. I should have said no. Should have let this be what it appeared, a chance encounter, a moment of compassion in an otherwise ruthless existence. Instead, I found myself nodding. "Yes. I'll make sure of it." Marcus drove Felix home while I followed in my own car, needing to see for myself the environment this extraordinary child was forced to navigate. The Henderson house was in a rundown neighborhood 30 minutes from the school, a sagging structure with peeling paint and a yard more weeds than grass. I watched from down the street as Marcus walked Felix to the door, saw a woman answer with barely concealed irritation, saw her snatch the note Marcus handed her without so much as a thank you before practically pulling Felix inside and slamming the door. The note explained that Mr. Morrison's social worker was unavailable and that I was sent by the school district, Marcus said, sliding back into my car. The woman, Mrs. Henderson, seemed more concerned about the inconvenience than the child's welfare. "Run a complete background check on the Hendersons," I instructed. "I want to know everything: finances, criminal history, how many foster children they've had, and why. I want to know if there have been any complaints filed against them and why those complaints weren't acted upon." Marcus nodded, making notes on his tablet. "Regarding the social worker, I've made contact with her supervisor. Ms. Chen is currently on medical leave following a car accident last week. Her caseload was supposed to be temporarily reassigned, but there appears to have been a clerical error. Felix Morrison fell through the cracks. Of course he did. The system was built on such failures, on overworked employees and underfunded departments and children who were easy to overlook because they'd learned to make themselves small, unobtrusive, forgettable. "I want a meeting with the supervisor," I said. "Tomorrow. And I want a full report on Felix's case history, every placement, every incident report, everything." "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "forgive me for asking, but what exactly is your interest in this child?" It was a fair question. Marcus had been with me for 8 years, had seen me make countless decisions affecting countless lives, but never with the personal investment I was showing now. I'd donated to charities, funded programs for at-risk youth, done my part to offset the moral ambiguity of my primary business ventures, but always at arm's length, always professionally distant. I saw myself in him, I admitted. Or rather, I saw who I might have been if circumstances had been different. He deserves better than what he's getting. Marcus was silent for a moment, then said, with respect, "Sir, there are thousands of children in similar situations. You can't save them all." "No," I agreed. "But I can save this one." That night, in my penthouse overlooking the city, I couldn't stop thinking about Felix Morrison. About the way he'd asked if I was a good guy or a bad guy, about his determination to become someone people could count on, about the casual cruelty of a system that had left a 7-year-old boy standing in the rain because he wasn't important enough to remember. My organization dealt in information, in leverage, in the currency of secrets and debts. We operated in those gray areas Felix had so perfectly identified, providing services that society needed but pretended to condemn. Protection, for a price. Justice, of a sort, for those whom the legal system had failed. Solutions to problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means. I'd built this empire on the foundation of my father's legacy, but I'd reshaped it according to my own principles. We didn't traffic in drugs or human lives. We didn't prey on the vulnerable or exploit the desperate. We existed in the shadows, yes, but with our own code, our own sense of honor in a world that often had none. And now, Felix Morrison had somehow become part of that world, whether he knew it or not. The reports came in over the next 48 hours, each one more damning than the last. The Hendersons had been foster parents for 6 years, cycling through dozens of children, maximizing their monthly stipends while minimizing actual care. No outright abuse, nothing actionable, just systematic neglect dressed up as acceptable parenting. They kept the children fed, clothed, and housed, meeting the bare minimum requirements while pocketing the difference between what they received and what they spent. Felix had been with them for 14 months, his fourth placement in 3 years. His file read like a tragedy: parents killed in a car accident when he was 4, no relatives willing or able to take him, a series of foster homes that ranged from inadequate to actively harmful. He was marked as difficult in his file, though the incidents cited painted a picture not of a troubled child but of one who refused to accept mistreatment silently, who advocated for himself and other children, who had the audacity to expect the adults around him to fulfill their responsibilities. In other words, exactly the kind of child the system punished for refusing to be invisible. "The supervisor will see you at 2 o'clock, Marcus informed me on the third day. Her name is Gloria Martinez, and she's been with Child Protective Services for 23 years. Her record is mixed. Some commendations for dedication, but also notes about resistance to changes in protocol and a tendency to become territorial about her cases." I filed that information away, already strategizing my approach. People like Gloria Martinez were products of a broken system, burning out slowly while trying to hold back the tide with their bare hands. They could be allies or obstacles, depending on how they were approached. The CPS office was exactly what I'd expected: fluorescent lights, worn carpeting, cubicles overflowing with files, and the unmistakable air of an organization drowning in need while starving for resources. Gloria Martinez met me in a small conference room, her expression wary but professional. She was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen too much tragedy to be easily impressed or intimidated. She studied me across the table, taking in my expensive suit and confident bearing, clearly trying to place me in her mental catalog of people who appeared in her office making demands. "Mr. Constantine," she began, "my assistant said this was regarding Felix Morrison, but she couldn't provide additional details. What's your relationship to the child?" "We met by chance," I said honestly. "I happened to be at his school during the storm earlier this week. He was left waiting in the rain for over an hour." Gloria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm aware of the incident. It was an unfortunate oversight during Ms. Chen's medical leave. We've addressed the communication breakdown. Have you addressed the fact that a 7-year-old child was abandoned in a storm?" I kept my voice level, professional, but let enough steel show through to make my point clear. "Or that this was the 4th such incident this semester alone? If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." "Mr. Constantine," Gloria said, her tone sharpening, "I appreciate your concern for Felix, but unless you're family or have some legal standing, I'm not at liberty to discuss his case in detail." I leaned forward slightly, holding her gaze. "Then let me be clear about my intentions. I'm interested in becoming Felix's foster parent, with the goal of eventual adoption." The words hung in the air between us, surprising me almost as much as they clearly surprised Gloria. I hadn't planned to say it quite so directly, quite so soon, but once spoken, the decision felt right with a certainty I rarely experienced. Gloria's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Constantine, foster care and adoption aren't simple processes. There are requirements, background checks, home studies, training courses. It typically takes months, even years, particularly for single male applicants. I'm aware of the challenges, I said calmly. I'm also aware that Felix has been in the system for 3 years, that he's been failed repeatedly by placements that saw him as a check rather than a child, and that he deserves better. I can provide that. Can you? Gloria challenged. What do you do for a living, Mr. Constantine? It was the question I'd been prepared for, the one that would require the most careful navigation. I'm a consultant and investor, I said, which was technically true if you defined those terms broadly enough. I advise businesses on risk management and strategic positioning. My financial records will show that I'm more than capable of providing for a child. Gloria studied me for a long moment, her experienced eyes searching for the truth beneath the polished presentation. Children aren't projects, Mr. Constantine. They're not problems to be solved or additions to a portfolio. Felix, in particular, has been through tremendous trauma. He needs stability, consistency, and genuine emotional investment. I understand that, I said quietly. And I'm offering all 3. Ms. Martinez, I'm not approaching this lightly or impulsively. I know what it's like to grow up feeling like an obligation rather than a priority. I know what it does to a child's sense of self-worth, how it shapes every relationship and decision for the rest of their life. I saw myself in Felix, and I'm in a position to give him what I never had, someone who chose him, not out of duty or financial incentive, but because he matters. Something in Gloria's expression shifted, the professional armor cracking just slightly to reveal the idealist who must have entered this field decades ago, before the system had worn her down. What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed? Because I'm not doing this despite who I am, I replied. I'm doing it because of who I am. I have resources most foster parents don't. I can provide the best education, healthcare, opportunities. But more than that, I understand what Felix needs because I needed it too. And I'm committed to being present, to showing up, to being the person he can count on. Gloria was quiet for a long moment, fingers drumming on the folder in front of her. Finally, she said, the process isn't quick, and I can't make any promises. You'll need to complete all required training, pass background checks, have your home evaluated. And even then, we prioritize placements with families, with 2-parent households that can provide diverse role models. I understand, I said. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the chance to prove myself. And if Felix doesn't want this? If he's not comfortable with you? I thought of Felix's question at the school, will I see you again? The hope in his eyes when I'd promised yes. Then it doesn't happen. His choice matters most. Gloria nodded slowly, approval flickering across her features. All right, Mr. Constantine. I'll send you the application materials. We'll start the process and see where it leads. But understand this, my primary concern is Felix's welfare. If at any point I believe this isn't in his best interest, it stops. Clear? Crystal clear, I agreed. And Ms. Martinez? Thank you for giving me the chance. As I left the CPS office, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, Sophia requesting urgent meeting. Says it's about the Volkov situation. The Volkov situation. Right. Because while I'd been focused on a 7-year-old boy in the rain, the rest of my life had continued spinning, complicated and dangerous as ever. Dmitry Volkov had been encroaching on territory my family had controlled for 3 generations, testing boundaries, probing for weakness. It required attention, strategy, and quite possibly violence. But as I drove toward the meeting, my mind kept returning to Felix. To the promise I'd made, not just to him but to myself. That I would show up. That I would be someone he could count on. For the first time in my adult life, I found myself wondering if I could truly balance both worlds, the one that had shaped me into who I was, and the one that might reshape me into who I could become. The answer, I suspected, would determine not just my future, but Felix's as well. The meeting with Sophia was held in one of our legitimate fronts, an upscale restaurant in the financial district that we'd owned for 15 years. She was already seated at our usual corner table when I arrived, a glass of wine untouched before her, her expression carved from ice and calculation. My sister had inherited our mother's beauty and our father's ruthlessness, a combination that made her one of the most formidable operators in our organization. "You're distracted," she said without preamble as I sat down. Dmitry Volkov noticed. "That's dangerous." I poured myself a glass from the bottle she'd ordered, taking a moment to assess her mood. Sophia didn't deal in pleasantries when business demanded attention, and the Volkov situation had been escalating for months. "I'm handling it." "Are you?" She leaned forward, her dark eyes searching mine. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've been absent from 3 critical meetings, you've delegated negotiations you normally handle personally, and Marcus tells me you've been spending your time at Child Protective Services and elementary schools." I should have known Marcus would report to her. His loyalty was to the family first, to me second, and Sophia was family in ways that transcended blood. We'd survived our father's cruelty together, had rebuilt his empire into something more sustainable, more strategic. She had every right to question decisions that affected our collective security. "I met someone," I said simply. Sophia's eyebrow arched. "A woman?" "Finally. Though I'll admit, elementary schools seem like an unusual hunting ground even for you." "A child," I corrected, and watched her expression shift from amusement to confusion to concern in rapid succession. "A 7-year-old boy named Felix Morrison. He's in foster care. I'm pursuing adoption." The silence that followed was profound. Sophia set down her wine glass with careful precision, her mind clearly racing through implications and complications. "Adrian," she said finally, her voice softer than I'd heard in years, "what are you doing?" I told her everything. About finding Felix in the rain, about his question that had cut through every defense I'd built, about the reports detailing systematic neglect and a system designed to fail children who needed it most. About the certainty that had crystallized in me, unexpected and absolute, that this child was meant to be part of my life. Sophia listened without interruption, her expression unreadable until I finished. Then she said, "You're serious about this?" "Completely. Do you understand what you're risking?" She leaned back, her tactical mind already mapping out consequences. "We exist in shadows, Adrian. We've built our lives on secrets and carefully maintained distance from anything that could be used against us. A child changes everything. He becomes a vulnerability, a pressure point our enemies will exploit without hesitation." "I know," I said quietly. "I've considered all of that." "Have you?" Sophia's voice sharpened. "Have you considered what happens when Felix is old enough to ask questions? When he wants to know why men follow you with guns, why people fear your name, why his classmates' fathers work in offices while his father works in shadows? What will you tell him?" "The truth," I said, the answer surprising even me. "When he's old enough to understand, I'll tell him the truth about who I am and let him decide what that means for us." Sophia studied me for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "You're not just adopting a child. You're trying to redeem yourself." The observation hit closer than I wanted to admit. "Maybe I am." "Is that so wrong?" "It's dangerous," she replied. "Redemption requires vulnerability, and vulnerability in our world gets people killed." She paused, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "But I also remember what our childhood was like. What father did to us. If you can give this boy something better, something we never had." She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. "I need to know you're with me on this," I said. "That the family will protect him if anything happens to me." "Always," Sophia said without hesitation. "He'll be Constantine. That means something, even in our world. Especially in our world." She picked up her wine glass again, her business mask sliding back into place. "But first, we need to handle Dmitry Volkov. Because right now, he thinks your distraction means weakness, and he's planning to test that theory." The shift back to business was abrupt but necessary. "What's he planning?" "He's made contact with the Brennan family in Boston," Sophia said, her tone grim. "They're considering an alliance that would give him access to shipping routes we've controlled for 2 decades. If that happens, we lose leverage on the eastern seaboard, and our profit margins drop by 30%. I processed this, running through scenarios and countermoves. The Brennans were old school, traditional in their approach to territory and alliances. They respected strength and history, two things our family had in abundance. Set up a meeting. I'll fly to Boston tomorrow and remind them why loyalty to the Constantines has served them well for 3 generations. Already done, Sophia replied. You leave at 8 a.m., Thomas Brennan expects you for dinner tomorrow evening. She hesitated, then added, Adrian, Volkov isn't going to back down easily. This could get ugly. Then we make sure we're uglier, I said with a cold certainty that came from years of navigating this world. But we do it smart. No unnecessary bloodshed, no attention from law enforcement. We show strength without revealing vulnerability. Sophia nodded, satisfied with my response. And the boy? What happens with him while you're handling business? I'm not approved as a foster parent yet, I reminded her. The process takes time. But I'll make sure he's looked after. Marcus has been monitoring the situation. Marcus is not a social worker, Sophia pointed out. And he's certainly not equipped to handle a traumatized 7-year-old if things go wrong. She was right, of course. I'd been approaching Felix's situation with the same strategic detachment I applied to business problems, focusing on logistics and resources while overlooking the emotional complexity of what I was proposing. A child wasn't an asset to be acquired or a problem to be solved. He was a living, breathing person with needs I was only beginning to understand. I'll figure it out, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure how. The flight to Boston the next morning gave me time to review everything we knew about Dmitry Volkov and his recent moves. He was ambitious, smart, and hungry for territory that wasn't his to take. Worse, he was young enough to be reckless, old enough to be dangerous, and connected enough to make his recklessness everyone's problem. The meeting with Thomas Brennan went exactly as I'd anticipated. We sat in his study, surrounded by portraits of his ancestors, and discussed territory, loyalty, and the value of long-standing alliances over promising but untested partnerships. By the end of the evening, Thomas had recommitted to our family, and Volkov's play for the eastern seaboard routes had crumbled before it began. But as I flew back to the city the following morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus that made my blood run cold. Felix Morrison hospitalized last night. Suspected broken arm and possible concussion. Henderson claims he fell downstairs. Investigation pending. I had the pilot change course immediately, directing us to a private airstrip closer to the hospital where Felix had been taken. Marcus met me outside the emergency room, his expression grim as he handed me a tablet displaying the incident report. Mrs. Henderson's story doesn't match Felix's injuries, Marcus said quietly. The attending physician noted inconsistencies and filed a mandatory report with CPS. Gloria Martinez is already here. I found her in the waiting area, looking exhausted and furious in equal measure. When she saw me, something complicated crossed her face, recognition perhaps of the timing, of what my presence here meant. You can't see him, she said before I could speak. You're not family, and you're not approved as a placement. Hospital policy is clear. What happened? I demanded, fighting to keep my voice level when every instinct screamed at me to tear through the hospital until I found Felix and confirmed he was safe. Gloria's expression softened slightly. He's going to be okay. Broken arm, mild concussion, extensive bruising. He's claiming he fell, but the pattern of injury suggests otherwise. The Hendersons did this. We don't know that for certain, Gloria said, though her tone suggested she suspected the same. Mr. Henderson was out of town on business. Mrs. Henderson says Felix was playing on the stairs despite being told not to, and that she found him at the bottom after hearing a crash. And you believe that? It doesn't matter what I believe, Gloria said wearily. It matters what we can prove. And right now, without Felix's cooperation, we can't prove anything. He's protecting them, I realized. He's too afraid to tell the truth. Gloria nodded slowly. Fear, or loyalty, or habit. Children in the system learn early that making waves often makes things worse. If he contradicts Mrs. Henderson's story and we can't substantiate it, he might end up in an even worse placement. The casual acceptance of this reality, the acknowledgement that the system designed to protect children might actually harm them for seeking protection, sent a wave of cold fury through me that I struggled to contain. So what happens now? Felix will be released into emergency foster care while we investigate, Gloria said. Given the circumstances, the Hendersons are suspended pending the outcome. We have a temporary placement lined up with a family who specializes in medical fostering. No, I said flatly. He comes with me. Gloria's eyes widened. Mr. Constantine, we've been through this. You're not approved. Then expedite it, I replied, my voice carrying the weight of command that made people in my world move without question. You know as well as I do that Felix isn't safe in the system right now. You know that whoever hurt him might try again, that bouncing him to another temporary placement will only traumatize him further. I can protect him. I can give him stability. Do whatever you need to do to make it legal, but he's coming home with me. It's not that simple, Gloria protested, though I could see her wavering. There are procedures, oversight requirements, court approvals. Then work the system, I said, leaning forward. You've been doing this for 23 years. You know how to navigate bureaucracy when a child's welfare demands it. I'm offering Felix a safe home with resources most foster families can't provide. I'm offering consistency and protection. What I'm asking you to do is your job, put his needs first. Gloria was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with protocol versus pragmatism. Finally, she said, if I do this, if I push through an emergency placement, you understand the scrutiny that comes with it? The home visits, the evaluations, the constant oversight until the adoption is finalized? I understand, I said. And I welcome it. Whatever it takes to keep him safe. She studied my face, searching for something, then nodded slowly. Wait here. I need to make some calls. An hour later, I stood outside Felix's hospital room, nerves I'd never experienced before making my hands unsteady. Gloria had secured emergency placement approval with conditions so numerous they'd required 3 pages of documentation I'd signed without hesitation. In 2 hours, Felix would be discharged into my custody, beginning what Gloria had called a trial emergency placement that could become permanent if all parties agreed. But first, I needed to see him. Needed to know he was okay. Needed to understand what had happened and whether my intervention had come too late. I knocked softly and entered to find Felix sitting up in bed, his left arm in a cast, a bandage wrapped around his head, and bruises blooming across his visible skin. But what broke my heart was his expression, carefully blank, emotionally shut down, retreating into that protective numbness that children learn when the world hurts too much. Hey, Felix, I said softly, approaching the bed slowly. Remember me? His eyes focused on me, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, but recognition, a flickering of connection that hadn't been there moments before. Mr. Adrian, he said quietly. You came. Of course I came, I replied, pulling a chair close to his bed and sitting so we were at eye level. I told you I'd show up, remember? Felix nodded, his good hand clutching the hospital blanket. Miss Martinez said I can't go back to the Hendersons. That's right, I confirmed. You're going somewhere else. Somewhere safe. Another foster home, he said dully, as if the words themselves were a verdict he'd heard too many times. Actually, I said carefully, watching his face, I was hoping you might want to come stay with me. If that's okay with you. Felix's eyes widened, genuine surprise breaking through his carefully constructed walls. With you? But you don't even know me. I know enough, I said. I know you're smart and brave. I know you ask hard questions and tell the truth even when it's difficult. I know you're someone worth showing up for. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. Felix, what happened to you wasn't your fault. And I need you to know that if you come home with me, nothing like that will ever happen again. I will keep you safe. How do you know? The question was whispered, fragile with hope he was afraid to fully embrace. How do you know you can keep me safe? The honest answer was complicated, involving resources and power and a willingness to use both in ways that might terrify him if he fully understood. Instead, I said, because keeping people safe is what I do. It's who I am. And you're not just anyone, Felix. You're important to me. Why? Tears welled in his eyes, the first real emotion breaking through. Why do I matter to you? I reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted, and placed my hand gently over his uninjured one. Because you asked me if anyone picked me up either. Because you understood something about me that most people never see. Because when you looked at me, you saw a person, not a title or a reputation or anything else. Just me. And that's rare. That's worth protecting. The tears spilled over, tracking down his bruised cheeks as weeks or months or years of held-back emotion finally found release. I'm scared, he admitted, his voice breaking. What if you change your mind? What if you decide I'm too much trouble? I won't, I said with absolute certainty. I'm not like the others, Felix. When I commit to something, I see it through. When I make a promise, I keep it. And I'm promising you right now, if you'll let me, I will be the person you can count on. Always. Felix was quiet for a long moment, processing this, weighing whether to trust or protect himself with distance. Finally, he asked, can I bring my books? I have 3 books that are mine. Miss Davis gave them to me. The question, so small and practical yet revealing so much about what he valued and feared losing, nearly undid me. You can bring anything you want, I assured him. Your books, your clothes, anything that's important to you. And we'll get you more books. As many as you want. Really? The hope in his voice was almost painful to hear. Really, I confirmed. I have a whole library at my home. You can use any of them, and we'll make sure you have your own shelf for the books that are special to you. Felix wiped at his tears with his good hand, trying to compose himself. Okay, he said softly. I'll try. I'll try staying with you. The word try carried the weight of every disappointment he'd experienced, every broken promise and failed placement. It was the best he could offer, and it was enough. That's all I'm asking, I said. We'll figure it out together. Marcus arrived an hour later with clothes for Felix and the discharge paperwork Gloria had expedited through channels I suspected she'd rather not examine too closely. As we prepared to leave, a nurse brought in a prescription for pain medication and instructions for caring for his injuries. The cast needs to stay on for 6 weeks minimum, she explained, directing her words to me as if I were an actual parent rather than a man who'd met this child less than a week ago. He should avoid physical activity, keep the cast dry, and watch for signs of complications. There's a follow-up appointment scheduled for next week. I absorbed the information, already mentally cataloging everything Felix would need: a safe bedroom, age-appropriate furniture, medical supplies, a tutor to help him keep up with schoolwork while he recovered. The logistics were straightforward. The emotional landscape was far more complex. Felix was silent during the drive to my penthouse, his eyes wide as he took in the city passing by outside the car windows. Marcus had retrieved his belongings from the Hendersons, a single garbage bag containing clothes, 3 well-worn books, and a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. It was a heartbreaking inventory of a 7-year-old's entire world. When we arrived at my building, the doorman greeted me as always, but his eyes widened slightly when he saw Felix. To his credit, he recovered quickly, offering a warm smile. Good evening, Mr. Constantine. And who's this? This is Felix, I introduced them. He'll be staying with me. Please make sure he's added to the approved residence list. Of course, sir. Welcome, Felix. The elevator ride to the top floor seemed to mesmerize Felix, watching the numbers climb higher than he'd apparently ever been. When the doors opened directly into my penthouse, his jaw dropped. You live here? He asked, stepping cautiously into the marble-floored entryway. This is like a palace or something. I saw my home through his eyes, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views, the custom furniture and original artwork, the sheer space that most people in this city could never afford. It was impressive, designed to intimidate business associates and demonstrate power. But for a child who'd spent the last 3 years in cramped, neglected foster homes, it must have seemed like something from a fantasy. "It's home," I said simply. "And now it's your home too, at least for as long as you want it to be." Marcus had arranged for one of the guest suites to be converted into a child's bedroom with remarkable efficiency. There was a bed sized appropriately for Felix, a desk, bookshelves, and a color scheme of blues and greens that felt calming rather than overwhelming. It was generic, not personalized, but it was clean and safe and entirely his. "This is my room?" Felix asked, standing in the doorway as if afraid to enter without permission. "Your room," I confirmed. "You can decorate it however you want. We'll get posters, or paint the walls, or whatever you'd like to make it feel like yours." Felix walked slowly to the window, looking out at the city lights spreading below us like fallen stars. "I can see the whole world from here," he said quietly. I joined him at the window, crouching down to his level. "Not the whole world. But a good part of it." "And Felix?" "This world, this view, this room, none of it matters as much as you feeling safe here. So if anything makes you uncomfortable, if you need anything, you tell me. Okay?" He nodded, then turned to face me. "Mr. Adrian? Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why do people call you Mr. Constantine at the hospital and the building, but I call you Mr. Adrian?" It was a perceptive question, touching on the complexity of identity and respect in ways he didn't fully understand yet. "Constantine is my family name," I explained. "It's what people use in business, formally. Adrian is my personal name. You can call me whatever feels right to you." Felix considered this seriously. "Can I call you just Adrian? Without the Mr.?" The request, so simple yet signifying a desire for connection beyond formality, touched something in me I hadn't known existed. "I'd like that," I said. "And maybe, when you're ready, if things work out between us." I hesitated, unsure how to phrase the offer without pressuring him. "You mean like being your son?" Felix asked with that characteristic directness I was learning to appreciate. "Miss Martinez said that's what adoption means. That you'd be my dad." "Yes," I confirmed. "But that's a big decision, and we have time to figure out if it's right for both of us. For now, let's just focus on getting to know each other. No pressure, no expectations. Just trying." Felix smiled then, small and tentative but genuine. "Okay. Just trying." That night, after Felix had fallen asleep clutching his stuffed elephant, I stood in the doorway of his room watching him breathe. The rise and fall of his small chest, the vulnerability of sleep, the trust implicit in allowing himself to rest in my home, all of it felt monumental and terrifying in equal measure. My phone rang at 3 in the morning, 6 days after Felix had come to live with me. Sophia's name flashed on the screen, and I answered immediately, already moving away from Felix's room where I'd been checking on him for the 3rd time that night. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Volkov knows about the boy." Ice flooded my veins. "How? Does it matter?" "He knows, and he's making moves. Adrian, you need to understand what this means. Everything we feared about vulnerability, about giving our enemies leverage, it's happening." I walked to my office, closing the door behind me before responding. "What kind of moves?" "He's reached out to contacts in CPS, trying to gather information about Felix's case. He's making inquiries about your adoption proceedings. And he's let it be known through intermediaries that he's aware of your new attachment." Sophia's voice was tight with controlled anger. "He's testing whether this is a weakness he can exploit." "Then we need to make it clear that it's not," I said, my mind already racing through scenarios and countermeasures. "Double security on the building, background checks on everyone who comes within 50 feet of Felix, and I want surveillance on anyone Volkov's been in contact with." "Already in motion," Sophia replied. "But Adrian, that's not enough. Volkov isn't going to stop at intimidation. If he thinks he can hurt you through Felix, he will. We need to handle this permanently." The implication hung in the air between us. In our world, permanent solutions meant violence, meant eliminating threats before they could materialize into action. It was a language I'd spoken fluently my entire adult life, decisions I'd made without hesitation when the security of our organization demanded it. But now, with Felix sleeping peacefully down the hall, the calculus felt different. Every choice I made would shape the world he grew up in, would determine whether the darkness that had defined my life would touch his. Not yet, I said finally. We handle this smart, not bloody. Volkov wants to see if Felix makes me weak. We show him that protecting what matters makes me stronger. And if he forces the issue? Sophia asked. If he moves against the boy directly? Then we end him, I replied with cold certainty. But we don't start this war, Sophia. We finish it if we must, but we don't start it. After ending the call, I stood at my office window watching the city sleep, wrestling with the fundamental contradiction of my situation. I'd spent years building an empire on controlled violence and strategic ruthlessness, convinced that emotional distance was necessary for survival. Now I was trying to create a family, to offer Felix safety and stability while operating in a world where those things were commodities to be bought and sold, or weapons to be used against you. The sound of Felix's door opening pulled me from my thoughts. I found him standing in the hallway, his stuffed elephant clutched in his good arm, eyes wide with fear in the dim light. I had a nightmare, he said quietly. The bad people came back. I crossed to him immediately, kneeling to his level. You're safe here, Felix. I promise. No one can hurt you. How do you know? The question that kept emerging, the fundamental uncertainty that no amount of reassurance could fully eliminate. Bad people always find a way. Instead of offering empty platitudes, I led him to the living room, settling on the couch with him beside me. You're right, I said honestly. Sometimes bad people do find ways to hurt the people we care about. That's why we have to be smarter than them, stronger than them. That's why I have security systems and people who help keep us safe. Felix processed this, his 7-year-old mind grappling with concepts far too mature for his age. Are you a bad person? He asked suddenly. Like, really? Not just gray area bad, but actual bad? The question deserved an honest answer, even if it risked everything. I've done things that some people would call bad, I admitted. I've made choices that hurt others to protect the people and interests I care about. I operate in a world where rules are different, where power and loyalty matter more than laws. Like the mob? Felix asked, and I realized with a start that his intelligence had been connecting dots I'd assumed were invisible to a child. Like in the movies where families control things and have secret rules? Something like that, I confirmed, impressed and concerned by his perception. Does that scare you? Felix was quiet for a long moment, considering. A little, he admitted. But also, the Hendersons were normal people, and they hurt me. You're supposed to be bad, but you've only been kind. So maybe normal and bad aren't what they're supposed to be. The wisdom in his observation, the way he'd already learned that the world's simple categories of good and evil rarely aligned with reality, broke my heart and filled me with fierce protectiveness in equal measure. I want to be better for you, I said quietly. I can't change what I am or what I've done, but I can choose what I become. And I choose to be someone you can trust. Okay, Felix said, leaning against me with a trust that felt both precious and terrifying. I choose to trust you. Even if it's scary. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights through the windows. Eventually, Felix asked, if bad people try to hurt me because of you, what will you do? I will stop them, I replied with absolute conviction. Whatever it takes, I will keep you safe. Even if it means being really bad instead of gray area bad? The question cut to the heart of everything I'd been wrestling with. Even then, I confirmed. Because protecting you matters more than anything else. More than my reputation, my business, my moral comfort. You matter most. Felix nodded against my shoulder, satisfied with this answer in a way that should have troubled me but instead felt right. We'd found an honesty with each other, an acknowledgement of reality that was more solid than any comfortable fiction. The next weeks unfolded in a strange duality. On the surface, I was navigating the mundane challenges of unexpected parenthood, helping Felix with homework, attending medical appointments, learning to cook meals that a 7-year-old would actually eat, establishing routines and boundaries that made him feel secure. Below the surface, I was managing escalating tensions with Volkov, monitoring threats, and making preparations I hoped would never be necessary. Gloria Martinez became a regular presence, conducting her mandated home visits with thorough professionalism but growing warmth. She watched how Felix and I interacted, noted the books multiplying on his shelves, observed the genuine affection developing between us, and gradually shifted from skeptical overseer to cautious ally. "He's thriving with you," she admitted during one visit, watching Felix explain his newest space book to me with animated enthusiasm. "I've reviewed hundreds of placements in my career, and I've never seen a child adjust this well this quickly. Whatever you're doing, it's working." What I was doing, I realized, was simply showing up. Being present in ways my own father never had been, prioritizing Felix's needs above business demands, creating a stability that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with consistent, genuine care. But the threat from Volkov continued growing like a cancer I couldn't excise without risking everything. He made his move 3 weeks after Felix came to live with me, not against Felix directly but against something he knew I valued. He orchestrated a raid on one of our warehouses, killing 2 of my men and destroying merchandise worth millions. The message was clear: he could hurt what I cared about, and he would continue escalating until I responded with the violence he expected, the violence that would justify his own expansion into our territory. Sophia convened an emergency meeting of our senior leadership. Everyone gathered in the secure conference room beneath the restaurant where this had all begun. The mood was grim, angry, demanding retaliation that would restore our reputation and demonstrate strength. "We can't let this stand," Marcus argued, his usually calm demeanor cracking under the weight of losing men he'd recruited and trained. "Volkov killed our people, destroyed our property, and if we don't respond decisively, every other crew in the city will think we've gone soft." "Adrian's right to be cautious," Sophia countered, though I could hear the frustration in her voice. "Escalating to open war draws attention we can't afford, risks fracturing alliances we've spent years building." "Then what do you suggest?" demanded Victor, one of our oldest associates. "We just accept the loss and hope Volkov grows a conscience." All eyes turned to me, waiting for the decision that would shape our organization's future. I thought of Felix, sleeping safely in my penthouse under layers of security I'd arranged. Thought of the promise I'd made to be someone he could trust, to choose who I would become rather than defaulting to who I'd been. "We don't respond with violence," I said quietly, and the room erupted in protests that I silenced with a raised hand. "We respond with precision. Volkov wants a war because he thinks chaos benefits him. We give him the opposite, exposure." I outlined my plan, drawing on resources and connections that existed entirely outside the traditional criminal infrastructure. Volkov's operation, for all its ambition, was built on dirty money and corrupt officials. What would happen if his financial records were anonymously delivered to federal investigators? If his political connections were exposed in a way that made them liabilities rather than assets? If his carefully constructed empire was dismantled not by bullets but by the very legal system he'd corrupted? "You're talking about destroying everything he's built," Sophia said slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Making an example that shows we're sophisticated enough to use their own weapons against them." "Exactly," I confirmed. "And we do it in a way that can't be traced back to us, that looks like legitimate law enforcement finally doing their job. Volkov goes down, his organization collapses, and we maintain our position without firing a single shot." "It's risky," Marcus observed. "If he suspects we're behind his exposure, he might lash out before the authorities can move. Then we make sure he's too busy dealing with federal investigators to focus on revenge," I replied. "We move fast, we move clean, and we end this without the bloodshed that would bring attention to all of us." The plan took 2 weeks to execute, 2 weeks during which I barely slept, balancing conference calls about evidence compilation with reading bedtime stories to Felix, managing surveillance operations while helping with second-grade math homework. The cognitive dissonance should have torn me apart, but instead, it clarified everything. I was fighting to protect not just territory or profit, but the future I was building with this child who'd asked if anyone picked me up either. When federal agents raided Volkov's operations simultaneously across the city, seizing records that detailed decades of corruption, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy, I was at Felix's school watching him perform in the class play. He had a small role as a tree in a production about environmental conservation, standing perfectly still with his arms raised like branches while other children acted around him. My phone buzzed constantly with updates I ignored until the performance ended. Sophia's message was succinct: "It's done. Volkov's in custody. His organization is finished." "Did you see me?" Felix asked excitedly as I met him backstage. "I didn't move at all, just like we practiced." "You were perfect," I assured him, pulling him into a hug that felt like celebration and relief and gratitude all tangled together. "The best tree I've ever seen." As we drove home through the city that night, Felix chattering about his classmates and the cookies they'd served after the play, I felt something shift in my chest. The weight I'd carried since that phone call from Sophia 3 weeks ago, the constant tension of managing threats while protecting innocence, it lifted like a physical burden removed. I'd neutralized the threat without becoming the monster Felix might someday fear. I'd protected what mattered without sacrificing the principles I was trying to build our life around. It wasn't redemption, exactly, but it was proof that change was possible, that the gray areas I operated in didn't have to be defined by their darkest corners. 6 months later, I stood in a courthouse with Felix beside me, Sophia and Marcus behind us, and Gloria Martinez smiling from the gallery. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen every variation of family dysfunction the system could produce, reviewed the thick file detailing our journey from emergency placement to this moment. "Mr. Constantine," she began, her eyes moving from the paperwork to where Felix stood holding my hand, "I've read Ms. Martinez's reports. I've reviewed the psychological evaluations, the home studies, the character references. I've noted that you've completed all required parenting courses, that Felix's academic performance has improved dramatically, that every measure we use to assess placement success indicates this is working." She paused, leaning forward slightly. "But I'm also aware of certain irregularities in your background. Business interests that exist in what we might charitably call gray areas." My heart hammered against my ribs, fear of losing Felix sharper than any threat I'd faced in my professional life. But before I could respond, Felix spoke up, his voice clear and determined. "Judge, can I say something?" She looked surprised but nodded. "Of course." "Adrian isn't perfect," Felix said, his hand tightening around mine. "He works with stuff that's complicated, and I don't understand all of it yet. But he shows up. Every single day, he shows up. He helps me with homework, he reads me stories, he makes sure I'm safe and happy and know I matter." His voice wavered slightly but remained strong. "My real parents died. The people who were supposed to take care of me after that mostly just wanted the money they got for keeping me. Adrian is the first person who wanted me, not what came with me. That has to count for something." The courtroom was silent. I saw Gloria wiping her eyes, Sophia's carefully controlled expression cracking to reveal genuine emotion, Marcus looking anywhere but at us to hide his own reaction. The judge studied Felix for a long moment, then turned her attention back to me. "Mr. Constantine, this child has more wisdom than most adults I encounter. He's right that showing up, being present and committed, matters more than perfect circumstances." She picked up her gavel. "It is the finding of this court that adoption is in Felix Morrison's best interest. From this day forward, he is legally and permanently Felix Morrison Constantine, with all the rights and protections that family name provides." The gavel came down, and Felix turned to me with eyes shining with tears and joy and relief. "I'm yours? Really yours? Forever?" "Forever," I confirmed, dropping to my knees to embrace him properly, feeling his arms wrap around my neck with fierce determination. "You're mine, and I'm yours. Family." Sophia approached as Felix and I finally separated, her expression softer than I'd seen in years. She crouched down to Felix's level. "You have my number, yes? The one Adrian gave you for emergencies?" Felix nodded seriously. "Good. Because now you're not just Adrian's family. You're Constantine family. That means if you ever need anything, ever, you call me. Understand? We protect our own. The weight of that promise, spoken in front of witnesses in a courthouse, was as binding as any contract signed in blood. Felix was under the protection of our entire organization now, marked as untouchable by association and love in equal measure. That night, after the small celebration dinner we'd held with Gloria, Sophia, and Marcus, after Felix had fallen asleep exhausted and happy in his room that had become truly his, I stood once again at my office window looking out at the city. My phone rang. An unknown number, which in my world usually meant trouble or opportunity in disguise. I answered cautiously. Congratulations on your adoption, Mr. Constantine. The voice was unfamiliar, cultured, carrying an accent that suggested Eastern European origins. My name is Alexei Petrov. I represent certain interests that have been monitoring your evolution, shall we say. Get to the point, I said, already running through mental files trying to place the name. The point is simple: you've demonstrated something rare in our world. The ability to adapt without becoming weak, to protect without becoming reckless, to change without losing effectiveness. This has not gone unnoticed by those who value stability and innovation in equal measure. And what do these interests want from me? Nothing, at present. Consider this a courtesy call. A recognition that the choices you're making, the balance you're striking between your professional obligations and personal commitments, this represents an evolution our entire community should observe and perhaps learn from. A pause. Children should not pay for their parents' choices, Mr. Constantine. You've made that principle operational in ways that honor us all. The call ended before I could respond, leaving me with more questions than answers. But the underlying message was clear: my decision to adopt Felix, the way I'd handled threats to protect him, the balance I was finding between two worlds that shouldn't coexist, it was being watched and evaluated by powers beyond even my organization's considerable reach. I returned to Felix's room, watching him sleep with his elephant clutched close, his cast-free arm flung out in the careless confidence of childhood security. The bruises from the Hendersons had long since faded. In their place was healthy color, the slight roundness that came from consistent good meals, the peaceful expression of someone who'd finally found safety. He stirred as I stood there, eyes opening to focus on me in the dim light from the hallway. Adrian? Is everything okay? Everything's perfect, I assured him, moving to sit on the edge of his bed. I just wanted to check on you. I'm good, he said, but didn't close his eyes again. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Choosing me? Your life was probably simpler before. The question, asked with heartbreaking vulnerability, demanded complete honesty. My life was simpler, I agreed. It was also emptier. You didn't complicate my life, Felix. You gave it meaning beyond power and profit. You made me want to be better, to choose light over darkness when both paths would achieve the same result. That's a lot of pressure on a kid, Felix observed with that characteristic insight that continually surprised me. I smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. You don't have to be anything except yourself. Just being you, asking hard questions, showing up with courage every single day despite everything you've been through, that's enough. That's everything. Felix smiled, settling back into his pillow. I love you, he said quietly, the first time he'd spoken those words without prompting or expectation of reciprocation. I love you too, I replied, the words coming easily despite years of emotional guardedness. More than I knew I could love anyone. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Felix. The best choice I ever made. Even better than being a boss of gray area stuff. I laughed softly. Infinitely better. Being your father matters more than any empire I could build. You're my legacy, Felix. Not the business, not the power. You. He fell asleep with a smile on his face, secure in the knowledge that he was chosen, wanted, loved. I sat there for a long time, watching him breathe, marveling at how completely this small person had reorganized my priorities and redefined my understanding of strength. In my world, power came from control, from the ability to make others bend to your will through force or fear or manipulation. But Felix had shown me a different kind of power, the transformative strength of vulnerability, of opening yourself to love despite the risk of loss, of choosing to show up for someone else even when it made you exposed. I'd spent my entire adult life building walls to protect myself from exactly the kind of weakness I'd embraced by loving this child. And somehow, in the paradox that defined our relationship, those walls had become unnecessary. Felix didn't make me weak. He made me focused, purposeful, willing to be strategic rather than simply ruthless because I was protecting something that mattered beyond myself. The road ahead wouldn't be simple. There would be questions as Felix grew older, confrontations about the nature of my work and the ethics of the empire I maintained. There would be threats from enemies who saw him as leverage, moments when the two worlds I inhabited would collide in ways I couldn't fully control. But we would navigate it together, with honesty and love as our foundation. I would teach him to ask hard questions and think critically about morality and power. He would teach me to see possibilities beyond the cynicism that had shaped my worldview. Together, we would create something neither of us could have built alone, a family forged not by blood or convenience, but by choice and commitment and fierce protective love. As I finally left his room and returned to my office, I found a message from Sophia, the Petrov call. We should discuss what it means. But tomorrow is fine. Enjoy tonight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to manage, new balances to strike. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply be grateful. For rain that had brought me to a school parking lot at the exact moment a small boy needed someone to show up. For wisdom to recognize what mattered when it appeared unexpectedly in my carefully controlled life. For courage to choose love over safety, vulnerability over distance, and the terrifying, exhilarating journey of fatherhood over the comfortable isolation I'd maintained for so long. I'd found Felix in the rain, broken and alone, asking if anyone had picked me up either. In saving him, he'd saved me, pulling me out of an emotional storm I hadn't even recognized I was drowning in. We'd chosen each other across impossible circumstances, building a family from the wreckage of abandonment and neglect and systems that had failed us both. And in that choice, in the daily commitment to show up for each other regardless of the cost, we'd found something more valuable than any empire, home. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.